First of all, I would like to thank TVET and Dr. Yoon for organizing this event, in fact, for organizing these workshops regularly. You're providing a very important service to the UNEVOC network and also to the regional and global TVET community. I also want to thank all the members of the UNEVOC network and other partners who are here today, and that makes this exchange possible. My colleagues from UNEVOC and I are especially happy to see that, as Dr. Yoon mentioned, we have in fact again in-person meeting again. I think through COVID, we all got used to meeting online, but it's still very valuable to meet in person, have to have these face-to-face exchanges. So I would like to talk to you about some topics related to the theme of the workshop. That's global transitions that we're observing and how that affects TVET, and also about the role of UNESCO and UNEVOC related to these global transitions and challenges. How do I proceed here? Good, thank you. So I start with an overview of some of these global transitions and how they affect TVET and the demand for skills and supply of skills. The first issue is economic uncertainty. It's something that came out of the COVID pandemic. There was a global recession caused by the pandemic. And although we are now on the path to recovery, this recovery is uneven in different countries, and the repercussions of the pandemic are still felt today. And we can see a long-term effect on how education and the economy have changed in many countries. Then there is technical change, as Professor Yu mentioned already in his remarks. Digitalization, automation is something that has, of course, started long before COVID, but the impact of these changes was exacerbated very much. When schools were closed, people started working from home. Use of these technologies became much more widespread, but it also revealed that there is a big digital divide that was already present before, but it became much more apparent because of COVID, because in many countries, for example, children did not have, or schools did not have the resources to provide learning from home. Unlike countries like Korea, where we are today, it was not possible to continue learning. And the same is also true for work. There are countries where it is possible to continue working from home today, and in other countries it's not possible because the resources and infrastructure are not there. Artificial intelligence is something that has been in the news recently over the last year, especially. There was a lot of progress, tremendous progress that we see in the use of artificial intelligence, and we cannot yet foresee what the impact of that will be on the world of education and on work and employment. In the labor market, we see in many countries shortages of skilled labor, especially with regard to some of the areas of work that are needed today, for example, digitalization and greening. There is also the fact that the informal economy plays a large role globally. Globally, it is estimated that about 3 out of 5 workers are employed in the informal economy, and those proportions are higher in low-income countries. But even in high-income countries, the informal economy is becoming more widespread with the rise of this gig economy, where people work on demand. There are demographic transitions in many countries. In some countries, the population is growing rapidly. Take India or Nigeria, for example. In these countries, there is a large youth population that have to find places in education and later also have to find employment. Other countries are shrinking in absolute numbers. For example, we see that is the case in China, in the Russian Federation, and other countries. Here, the workforce is shrinking over time, which also poses challenges for these countries. Then there are societal and political issues. We see global crises or regional crises. Just recently, another war is about to break out in the Middle East, possibly. Migration is one problem that affects many countries. There is a big push from the global south to the global north, people moving from Africa, Latin America, and Asia to Europe and North America. And this, of course, also has an impact on education and employment, both in their countries of origin, but also in the host countries. And then the last issue is although mentioned last, a very important issue, the sustainable development and the impact of climate change. We see this in the increase of environmental disasters, for example. Ocean levels are rising. There is a loss of biodiversity, and this can only be solved by fundamentally transforming the way we consume and produce. So there is this green transition that's needed, but for that we need skills, green skills. And we'll give one example of that. That's the move from fossil fuel to renewable energy. So as these statistics here show, if we move rapidly, if we try to phase out fossil fuels to the largest possible extent it is possible to reduce global CO2 emissions by 1/3 from 2018 to 2030. But for that, you need skills, of course. You need people who are able to work with renewable energy, solar cells, water. You need skills to make full use of energy efficiency technology. The demand for green skills is growing. These are some statistics from LinkedIn analysis of job postings from 2002 to 2023. And we can see clearly that the demand for green skills is increasing. The share of green talent in the workforce is growing, and also the share of job postings that require at least one green skill is growing, and that's just from one year to the next. Why would we see that the increase in the demand that is greater than the increase in the supply? So there's a supply shortage with regard to green skills. We see these knowledge gaps and bottlenecks also when we look at individual sectors. Here I mention agriculture, water management, energy and waste. In all of these sectors, there are skills that are needed to mitigate the effect of climate change and also to adapt to climate change. For example, in agriculture, there are new crops that may have to be developed to deal with, for example, that are drought resistant. We have to be able to find methods to use water more efficiently. I already talked about the need for move to renewable energy. There are certain skills needed to install and maintain solar cells, for example. You have to find more ways of becoming energy efficient. This is, for example, one focus of the build sector next year. My colleague from BRBB will speak about that in the afternoon. This project will look at the construction sector next year. There's a lot of potential for becoming more energy efficient. That needs new skills. And then, of course, the last issue here is waste. We have to find ways of minimizing waste and increasing reuse and recycling. Again, there is a need for new skills in reskilling and upskilling of the workforce. These gaps in education and in TVET start earlier in school. This is shown by an analysis that UNESCO conducted. We did a survey of youth globally last year, and we found that in this survey, 70% of surveyed youth said that they cannot explain climate change, can only explain its broad principles, or know nothing about it at all. Now, why is this? This is because climate change is not sufficiently covered in curricula, or teachers do not have the necessary skills to convey lessons about climate change appropriately so that they stick with you. So there's a lot that has to change to make sure that I put a lot of emphasis here on green skills to make sure this is that these skills are taught in school, starting with primary and secondary school, but also in technical and vocational education and training. I want to talk about what UNESCO is doing about these challenges. How is UNESCO responding? As you know, and as we already heard, UNESCO developed a new strategy for TVET that was launched last year that covers the year 2022 to 2029. And there are three main lines of actions that work on three levels: at the level of individuals, at the level of economies, and at the level of societies. When we look at the individuals, the goal is to develop skills for individuals to learn, work, and live. This means, for example, finding ways of building in all countries flexible lifelong learning pathways. And that's why this is on the agenda today. Lifelong learning is so important. People have to continuously, throughout their career, learn new skills. When we look at economies, the goal of UNESCO is to make sure that there are sufficient skills to make economies inclusive and sustainable. For example, by putting more emphasis on digital and green skills in education, or by supporting teachers so they can provide TVET that responds to the demands that exist in the labor market today. And finally, the goal is to develop skills for inclusive and peaceful societies. And this is, in a way, linked to the original mission of UNESCO. When UNESCO was founded, it was founded to promote peace through international cooperation in education, science, and culture. UNESCO still believes in the importance of education for peace today, and this can be done, for example, by integrating lessons on global citizenship in TVET curricula. UNEVOC is, of course, key for the implementation of UNESCO's strategy on TVET. You're well familiar with UNEVOC. Just as a reminder, the UNEVOC network, of which you are members, was in fact created 30 years ago. So we're just celebrating our 30th anniversary, founded in 1993. UNEVOC itself was founded 9 years later in 2002. So we celebrated our 20-year anniversary last year. And the mission of UNEVOC today is to increase the relevance, quality, attractiveness, and accessibility of national TVET systems, and to promote cooperation among member states. And of course, much of that work is done through the UNEVOC network. UNEVOC network today has 231 member institutions in 130 countries. There are still some gaps on this map, empty spots. The most recent country from which an institution joined the network was Ecuador this year. And in Asia and the Pacific, we now have 60 member institutions. The strategy for TVET of UNESCO emphasizes the role of UNEVOC throughout the document. And I want to just give two quotes here from the strategy that illustrate the importance of UNEVOC and the UNEVOC network. The first one is that it says, UNESCO-UNEVOC will function as the hub of the UNEVOC network and as a resource center for research and innovation, knowledge sharing, and capacity development. And keep in mind, this is to serve as a resource center for a response to these global challenges, the transitions that I mentioned at the outset of this presentation. It continues to say that the UNEVOC network will be the key driver for mutual learning, capacity building, and advancing international cooperation in TVET. So there's a very important role that all of you play within the UNEVOC network for the implementation of the UNESCO strategy for TVET. But of course, the end beneficiaries are all the member states themselves. So your constituents and fellow citizens in your countries. UNEVOC is currently developing its new medium-term strategy for the next 3 years, for 2024 to 2026. And we drew inspiration for this from the UNESCO strategy for TVET and also from lessons learned over the past years, for example, an evaluation of the UNEVOC network and an evaluation of our previous medium-term strategy, and also consultations with members of the UNEVOC network, so with you. And we have decided to propose 2 strategic objectives and 4 outcomes. The strategic objective, the first one is aimed at TVET institutions, and the second one at the global TVET community. When we look at TVET institutions, the goal of UNEVOC is to, first of all, make sure that TVET institutions are able to develop new and updated strategies, frameworks, and tools that help them improve the attractiveness and outcomes of TVET. Again, to respond to the challenge that we face today, for example, with regard to the dual green and digital transition. The second outcome is aimed at staff in these institutions, so at managers and teachers. We want to make sure that they have the necessary skills that are needed to transform their institutions and to respond to the needs of learners. This includes marginalized groups and with an emphasis on Africa and small island developing states, because those are the two priority regions or country groups of UNESCO. Under the second strategic objective, here you find now the UNEVOC network mentioned. One expected outcome is that the network has a greater reach and impact on the quality and performance of national TVET systems. And we hope to accomplish this through continued expansion, new partnerships, engaging more in multilateral cooperation with different partners, and this includes also partners outside of the network, of course, as well as increased knowledge sharing and peer learning, such as with a workshop like the one that we are participating in today and over the coming 2 days. And then the fourth outcome is aimed at the global TVET community, where we hope that UNEVOC can become a resource center that provides evidence on TVET, for example, in forms of statistics, results of research and analysis, and skills foresight, with a focus on mainly the dual green and digital transition, but also some of the other challenges that we know about today and that may arise over the coming years. To conclude, I want to show just 3 examples of the UNEVOC's recent work. One is the BUILD project that I already mentioned, that we will hear more about in the afternoon. BUILD stands for Bridging Innovation and Learning in TVET. And the objective here is to identify new qualifications and competencies, to integrate them in curricula, and finally to implement them in teaching. And the emphasis is in here on digital and green skills. For now, BUILD is limited to countries in Africa, Asia and the Pacific and Europe, but we may expand it to other regions in the next phase of BUILD. Another resource that UNEVOC provides is our database of innovative and promising practices. We have just document our 100th innovative and promising practice. These are practices that in many cases are identified with the help of members from the UNEVOC network, but those are the practices that come from UNEVOC centers, and we hope that they are useful for members of the global TVET community, can help them transform their institutions. And the last example that I wanted to show is research on resilience in TVET. This is something that also came out of COVID, our response to the COVID pandemic. Here, UNEVOC works on finding ways to make institutions or help institutions and individuals become more resilient for the digital transition and for the green transition. And we're expecting to have a publication here coming out early next year, maybe in February. Now to conclude, what are some of the possible future activities by UNESCO-UNEVOC? Of course, we do many things, but we will continue to emphasize the transition to a greener and more sustainable economy. This is the key challenge from our perspective. It's also closely aligned, of course, with the Global Sustainable Development Agenda of the United Nations. We'll continue to work on the digital transformation on TVET. We also hope to look at the impact of artificial intelligence in that context. And we have some partners that are expertise in it, members of the UNEVOC network that are experts in this field. We will continue to promote innovation excellence in the design and provision of TVET. I didn't say much about gender inclusion and youth employment. We have later in the afternoon, we also have one segment that looks at this. Although I didn't go into this, this is also an important area of work for UNEVOC. The exclusion of certain marginalized groups continues to be a problem. That's why we want to find solutions to that, to make sure that everyone has access to TVET. Engagement with the private sector is another area of work that we will continue to be engaged in. UNEVOC currently makes important contributions to the Global Skills Academy of UNESCO, but there is more that we can do, we believe. And then finally, we would like to make more use of the expertise in the UNEVOC network. We are a small center, as you know. We have just 20 colleagues that are very productive, however, but we can only play our role in the global TVET community by working with all of the members of the UNEVOC network. So that's why we are counting on you and your expertise to find solutions to these challenges that I talked about earlier. And I'm really happy that we have more opportunity to, again, meet in person, and I look forward to the exchange with you over the coming 3 days. Thank you very much.